So are we ready? Yeah, okay, super, thank you very much. Right, okay, hello everybody, welcome to PAM. We'll start with attendance and apologies. So we've got apologies from Assistant Chief Constable Kane, Maria Earls and John McFall. There's nobody else, I don't think. The minutes of the meeting. Oh, yes, shall we do introductions? Yes, let's do introductions. Tom, do you want to start?
Yes, hello, Tom Thorpe. I am the PCC's Policy and Scrutiny Manager.
Hello, Rob Bowles. I'm the Chair of the Federation in North Yorkshire.
Claire Craven-Griffiths, Chief Constable's Chief of Staff.
Hello, Mark Kahn. I am the Head of Covert Services.
Assistant Chief Constable Amanda Oliver.
Good afternoon, Fraser Sampson. I'm the Interim CEO.
Hello, I'm Lisa Winwood. I'm the Temporary Chief Constable.
Will Naylor, the Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Right, and Julia Mulligan, Police and Crime Commissioner. Okay, now we'll go on to the meeting, the minutes of the meeting. Has anybody got any comments on the minutes? Nope. No. So those can be agreed then. Thank you. Have we got any questions from the public? No? Yeah, I missed the actions. I am trying to keep this on time. So the first one, 221. There's a meeting on the 20th of August, so I was going to assume that we have an update following that meeting.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. 224, which is Operation Kingfisher.
Yeah, everything's just still progressing in relation to the special grant, and we are awaiting news of when any protest activity might occur.
There was going to be a sort of wash-up presentation after, I think it was agreed after all the court cases are
They're still
concluded.
ongoing.
They're still ongoing.
Yes, they are, yeah.
Okay, so, and I've also, there obviously, I know in the meantime you're having a look at how you might learn lessons from the previous protests, and you're looking at operational plans for the future.
Absolutely.
So my suggestion would be outside of that of this meeting, sort of an early heads up on those will be helpful.
I gave Tom a briefing on it yesterday.
I'm aware that you
yeah.
gave them a briefing, but I think it would be, because there's lots of people are sort of mentioning things to me, so what I'd really appreciate is a sort of more formal a briefing, really.
We'll get something in the diary.
Yeah, rather than just having things sort of mentioned to me. That would be really helpful.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I mean, it's nice having lots of things mentioned to me, but it'd be good
Yes.
to just yeah. Okay, thank you. And then, and I think then all of the other actions have been closed.
Just on them, so some of them were discussed at the last meeting. I'm going to ask, some were verbal, I'm just going to get some of those in writing, but
Yeah.
they can stay closed, if that's
Yeah.
right.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. So we've done questions from the public. I'm assuming there's none have come in between now and then.
If there are any, we'll deal with them.
Yeah, all right, thank you. Okay, so the main thematic, please.
I'll press the clicker. I think it should work. No.
The other way round, isn't it? The other way round.
Oh.
That way round. And the right hand button at the top. Top right.
There we
Oh, there you go.
Oh.
What's that one?
Do apologise. Top right.
I believe, yeah.
Okay.
Should take it forward.
Right. Thank you. Once I've got over the technology, I'm the lead for the digital forensics unit as well. So.
Enough said, really.
Enough said. Yes. Shall I go now, Commissioner? That's it. Right. I've put together a slide here just to talk through the contest strategy. It is a national strategy that filters down, and every force are sort of obliged to follow it. But what I will do is, as I go through my presentation, give you an idea of how we in North Yorkshire follow some of the strands of contest. The contest strategy was reviewed this year, as it says there. The new contest strategy was released by the Home Secretary in June 2018, and there was a review, and the decision of the review was that, it's not clicking over, but the decision of the review, can I press that?
My able assistant.
The decision of the review was to...
That's why an assistant chief constable.
Mark's assistant.
Thank you. It was to maintain it under the 4 Ps, which was an old and tried and tested method. And I'll just go through the 4 Ps now and just explain what they are. So prevent is about stopping people becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. Pursue is to stop terrorist attacks, so that is when we get information and intelligence and we go out to stop those attacks. Protect is to strengthen our protection against the terrorist attack, and prepare is to mitigate the impact of a terrorist attack. So those are the 4 Ps, and they are interdependent on each other, especially around prevent and pursue. So people that who we're trying to stop to become terrorists and maybe get through the gap, then we move into the pursue.
So Mark, can I ask a real basic
Yes.
question? So what is the definition of a terrorist and a terrorist attack?
Right, the definition of a terrorist attack is someone, I think the important element of it is someone who has an ideology.
Right.
So, so for example, an individual who commits mass murder, that is murder when there's no ideology, so they've gone out and they've killed. A terrorist has some kind of ideology behind the action that they take, and obviously the implication of the word is they want to cause terrorism from.
That could be as much a political ideology as a religious ideology.
Yes.
Or any other ideology.
Yes, and we find that there is obviously Islamist ideology, but a lot of what we're looking at now is around right-wing, in particular right-wing ideology, which is something that we're seeing more and more in the North East.
And of course we had the terrible murder of Joe Cox as well.
Absolutely.
Which focuses minds particularly in the north.
Yeah, and the
Yeah.
Finsbury Mosque attack, where
Yeah.
so yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so so going on to prevent. So I'll start with prevent. Prevent, I think, traditionally has probably been the area where we have been most involved from a local policing basis, because it is very much a local policing response. So prevent is about communicating and engaging with local communities and identifying people who are at risk of radicalisation at an early stage, so that we can provide some support to them, and that happens on a regular basis. Just to talk through, I've got a slide later on about the channel process, which I'll come to, but basically there's a duty on all agencies to identify potential individuals who could become radicalised, and we work as multi-agencies in local areas to identify strategies about how we go about delivering that service. So, for example, we have prevent coordinators right across our districts, all 7 districts within North Yorkshire and in the City of York. And the prevent coordinators will hold what we call bronze meetings. We break it down into bronze, silver and gold. So a bronze meeting will be the local police officer, someone, maybe the local GP, some local social workers, and they get together and they identify people who might be at risk. They identify things that we might be able to do in schools and places like that to engage with the local community.
So can I so you talked a little bit there about obviously the sort of local policing, but obviously counter-terrorism is something far wider than North Yorkshire.
Yes.
So it might be just quite helpful to set it in
Okay.
how North Yorkshire works with other policing bodies and organisations.
Right. So the counter-terrorism policing North East have their prevent coordinators, chief inspector, and they sort of set out a policy for the 7 regional forces within our region.
But we have a 7-force approach, don't we?
Yeah.
So we have a counter-terrorism unit, that is based predominantly within West Yorkshire Police's area, with representatives from each of the 7 forces, and then we've got a department within each of the 7 forces as well that link into that unit, and then obviously link into the service as well, the security services, so that there is a national network linked very much into the local network.
So, because obviously the Met has the lead for CT nationally.
Yes.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a sort of layered approach.
There is.
Yeah.
And then so we've got North East is our area. We have a prevent coordinator within the North East counter-terrorism policing, and they link in. We have a funded post within our special branch, an officer who is funded to be a prevent officer, and they are a North Yorkshire officer who goes out and does some of the coordinating work.
And so when something happens, because of course it has happened here in North Allerton recently, as we've seen through the recent cases that's gone through the courts, the response then is a combination of those national, regional and local resources.
Absolutely, it's something that we've planned for and exercised over many years, and thankfully rarely have to put it into practice, Commissioner, but there has been examples around the country and indeed here in North Yorkshire where we have put it into practice. So there's agreed protocols, we all know what our roles are, we all know what our roles are within the first few hours of a response, and then moving forward what our roles are after that, and we've practiced that and practiced it, and again put it into being here, and made sure that it works correctly. So we're very, very well supported as a force. We can draw really, really quickly upon lots and lots of national and regional specialist resources that we might need for an investigation at this level.
Yeah, because I think it's important to realise that policing is made up of different specialist capabilities that not every force holds themselves, and that we draw on that. And nor would it be right for us to do so, because they are very specialist in nature.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I I suppose the downside or ramifications of that is being candid, prevent doesn't always get a good coverage in the press. It's sometimes seen a bit negatively, and that comes from a sort of central strategy delivered locally. How do you try and overcome some of those sort of national issues that come with prevent locally, when your officers are working with people or partners to try and get messages through or reach out to people or whatever it might be?
I mean, prevent in particular has a bad name amongst some Muslim communities. We've identified that in particular in our Muslim communities, and we use independent advisory groups, so IAGs, to link in local officers within places such as Skipton, our communities which are more, have more Muslims in it, are well known by the community, and we address those issues. We've had a community meeting here where representatives of the community came, and we talked about prevent openly, about what it is that we as North Yorkshire Police are trying to get from prevent. And actually within our area it's not just the Muslim community, it's actually for us it's far right wing, where we are sort of engaging more. So it's about being open. I think it's a good strategy in terms of what it's trying to do. I think the perception that it's some kind of spying is what the Muslim community feel, but it is community policing. It is direct community policing. It's open and it's transparent. So we try and address it by being open about it.
And have you seen those kind of events make a difference? Because one event might not change minds, but if it's a course of over a year or 2 years or longer, but do you see that sort of mindset shifting at all?
Yeah, I think we have good relationships with our Muslim communities within North Yorkshire. I think that the information passes between the police and the community and the local authority very easily. Touch wood, we don't have too many problems or issues, and I would be confident that we'd be able to identify them and be supportive of each other, us of the community and the community of us, to deal with any issues that arose.
Certainly, I mean, we've done some visits to mosques relatively recently, and feedback that we got from people was more around them feeling vulnerable, actually. And so being victims of hate crime, those sorts of things, I think, as opposed to any specific feedback around feeling picked on by prevent, for lack of better terminology.
Yeah.
And not necessarily knowing what to look out for in terms of
Yeah.
vulnerability. What does that
Yeah.
mean? How can I help? What does it look like? And
Yeah.
not quite knowing what
Yeah.
constitutes vulnerability or
Yeah.
being susceptible to that. And what doesn't.
Yeah.
And mothers coming to me saying, well, how would I know if my child was involved in
Yeah.
this? What would I need to do? Look out for? What are the signs? Because the last thing a mother wants is their child to get into these sort of problems. And so real concern amongst mothers that they don't know what to look out for.
Yeah. So that's with the prevent, and then just moving on. Obviously, pursue is an element. It's about the investigation, and part of the national review was about how security services and police investigate crimes, and there's how information is passed between communities and the investigating agencies. I won't go into that too much. I don't. But the next one is protect, and I know we're on the. We'll come to the governance board, but in terms of protect that's another area of work where we as the police are engaged, and we have a new contest board which is chaired by ACC Oliver, and each of the areas, York, Harrogate, the county, Scarborough, have representatives, the commanders. They all have smaller contest boards in the area, and we are looking, because the national strategy around protect is to look at both local authorities and private business joining together to protect public spaces, open spaces. So that's through architecture.
And we've
things
seen
like
that in York, for example,
Yes.
haven't we?
Yeah,
Yes.
and we play our part
Yeah.
in terms of advisory. for
Just
that.
on a reassurance point of view,
Yeah.
because I've been involved in a little bit of that on the side, explain the process by which the police provide that advice. Say, for example, there are Christmas markets that then, they go through a process whereby the threats are assessed and all
Yes.
that's done, and then things are put in place to mitigate those.
Yes. So there's a tried and tested methodology that we use to assess risk. We go about doing that with specialist officers. We then look at how we're going to mitigate that risk. And of course we can't eliminate the threat completely, but what we can do is mitigate. Mark is going to talk about Project Servitor, which is something that isn't unique to North Yorkshire, but we're one of the few forces that have taken it as far as we have and as quickly as we have, just to look at ways of really preventing crime before it occurs. But yeah, we have a tried and tested methodology. We work in partnership. So an example being the open air theatre at Scarborough is what we'd class as a crowded place. We don't just provide the policing response, we work with that organisation to look at stewards, marshals and the like, what they can do around the infrastructure, what they can do around the searching of people as they come in. The public play their part in being our eyes and ears, and so it really is a whole community approach. When you think of some of the events that we've had in the last couple of weeks, the Great Yorkshire Show for instance, the races, we are an events type force where we've got lots of crowded places, so we work very, very well in partnership to try and protect the public as best as we can.
And if a business or something has a concern that we're planning something like that, is it clear who they get in touch with and how?
Yes, on our website, and this is advertising moment, I think probably on our website there is a link to national advice around for people who may be organising an event about keeping people safe, and we've got all sorts of material on there where people can look at training their staff to what to look out for, what you do if you get a bag, an abandoned bag, that sort of thing. So that is on there for event organisers. So that do you want me to talk about Project Servitor, or are you at this stage? Okay, so
keep going, Mark, because we're only on the second slide. So
I'll move on to the second slide. The second slide is go through it very quickly. It's gone.
Right, I've got it back.
It's all
I
right.
need to sort of do a nod if
Right. The second slide just tells you how we get through prevent. So it's the elements of prevent, from tackling causes of radicalisation, then early intervention, and then if we get people who have gone over to terrorism but we want to rehabilitate them, then there are programmes that we rehabilitate them as a partnership. Okay, thank you. And then we go on to the governance processes in North Yorkshire. So The Prevent Strategic Board sits at the centre. It's chaired by Paul Shevlin, who is the CEO for Craven District Council, and it has representatives, as it says, from all those areas. And then linking into that are the various contest boards that we have. We have our own, we'll link into there, and local authorities have their own contest boards.
So it's right to say local authorities lead on the prevent
Yes.
work
Yes.
in specific local areas, not the police. The police are a partner in what
Yeah.
local authority led.
Yeah, and we're an important partner, but
Mm.
yes, they have that resource to be able to get into schools, get into health, and all that. So, and so that's Prevent. Over on the right hand side, Det, Robson, and Jane Mowat. If we're going on a policing gold silver structure, they're sort of more the silver, so that they write plans about how the local delivery groups will deliver. They identify any sort of performance indicators or outcomes, and they bring that to the Prevent Strategic Board. We're trying to make the Prevent Strategic Board, I suppose, we're trying to get the local delivery groups to be more accountable to the Prevent Strategic Boards, and get the Prevent Strategic Board to look more closely about what the strategy within North Yorkshire, specifically for North Yorkshire, is. And how does it work in North Yorkshire Police? Well, we have the contest board, as I said, it's chaired by the ACC. It's a police-only board at the moment because it's about how we work within the organisation. We do link in with partners outside the contest board. And then we have a Prevent Goal Group, so that's the one I've just shown you, that's chaired by Paul Shevlin. ACC Oliver sits on there, and I'm a deputy on that. So, and we present our special branch provide information, intelligence that's required from the board, which is gathered from all the partners. And then the district prevent boards, so those are the local governance boards that meet up and run. A lot of in fact all of the district prevent boards tend to link in with safeguarding. So it's a safeguarding approach around prevent, and it fits in nicely. It's the same sort of model, so they fit it into there. Okay, thank you. Right, the channel process. Channel is the referral process where an individual who's identified by any of the agencies is then put through the channel process. So any agency can identify an individual who may need help. It then goes to a panel's call, which is chaired by someone from the local authority, and then a decision is made in terms of how that individual can be supported. The thing with channel is it's a voluntary basis, so any individual who we're going to provide some interventions for has to volunteer to have those interventions.
And how often does that happen in North Yorkshire?
Fortunately, touch wood, not that often. So we do get individuals identified, but then those that actually go to a full channel process is much smaller. So there are other interventions before we get to channel, because it's quite...
But it is something that we do.
It's something we do, and we have done.
It's
yes.
not
Because
rare.
a lot of people listening to this would be surprised
Yeah.
that this happens in North Yorkshire.
Yeah.
I suppose is what I'm getting to.
Yeah, and that's my point. It's
Yeah.
not rare
Yes.
that it happens.
No.
You know, the numbers are thankfully relatively small, but it is something that we do quite regularly.
And most of our channel referrals are around extreme right wing. Well, that's what I can say as well. That's the threat up here. Yeah.
And how confident, it's not necessarily a policing matter, it's more sort of the local authority lead, probably, but confident that those cases that are going to get to the right point quickly enough and that they don't fester and then they get reported when potentially someone's already quite far down a road that we could have stopped them going down.
I think the proof's in the pudding in what happens across the UK, really. I mean, this is the early intervention to stop anybody getting to that point where they commit a real big terrorist attack. So this is, you know, everybody's pinning their hopes on this being as absolutely ultimately successful as it can be.
Okay. And then these are examples. I'm going through the community gauge. It's just a list. You know, the partner agencies, safe neighbourhood teams are channel trained. There's channel, so practitioners, ground level practitioners, are all trained in channel and how to recognise the signs. Making the Link was a conference, a couple of conferences that were run, multi-agency conferences, where again that was practitioner based, so we brought practitioners into a central point from all agencies and provided them with inputs on how to identify potential radicalisation and those people who are vulnerable. We have key links with schools, places of worship, iconic sites such as York Minster, both directly and through partnerships, mainly through the local boards. So through the local boards we identify those iconic sites, or the schools or places of worship that we link in.
Can I ask that, you
Yes.
mentioned before you wanted to make the local groups more accountable to the central strategic board. Does that imply there isn't necessarily the accountability that would be desired at the moment, and what's the impact of that?
I think from my perspective is there's a lot of good work happening at a local level, because North Yorkshire is so diverse and so large. There are different pockets of work happening, and I think that sometimes it's very localised, and if we're to learn lessons or we're trying to transfer the knowledge across from one place to the other, we need, I believe, more of a central conduit where we identify the positive outcomes and where we could have done things better. And I don't think that's as... I think there's an area for development.
Yeah, I think this is more about the motivation of everybody sitting within this arena is to constantly get better. It's really important that we do. So there isn't anything that's really broken or really bad about this. It's just that we're really motivated to keep going and continuously improving and learning, and I think it's more about that.
Yeah.
And so we constantly look at ourselves and assess ourselves.
So, whilst I don't, it's not appropriate to go into details, obviously in the recent court case that we've just had, North Yorkshire Police were criticised by the judge for the way that we responded to that, and that's all in the public domain. I suppose my question is what are you doing to look at those issues that cropped up from that case, and how are you learning from it in order to continuously improve? Because arguably, those two individuals that have now been convicted could have ended up in the channel process and didn't. So my question really is how are we learning from that case? Because it is highly unusual here in North Yorkshire and in other parts of the country as well, I would suggest. And what is North Yorkshire Police doing to learn from that?
Yeah, so quite rightly we've talked about the partnership approach that's really important for individuals. In that particular case, the learning, to answer your question from the police perspective, we carried out a structured debrief that's a process that we've agreed through the College of Policing. We carried out that structured debrief. We took all of the learning points from that and drew up an action plan. Myself and ACC Phil Kane oversee that action plan as part of our operations board, and we are mapping progress to make sure that we are continuing on that. We're about to move that action plan across to the contest board so that we can look at it actually in more detail than just the many things that we look at from a performance perspective each month. So it's very, very much on the radar and very much something that we are continuing to improve upon.
Okay, I think outside of this meeting then, what we'd like to see sort of greater detail around that, because I think it was quite a public criticism of North Yorkshire Police, I think we would need to be reassured on behalf of the public that is, and I'm sure it is. I'm not saying that it isn't. I think we would want some sight of that.
Yes. Okay.
And then obviously the public play their part in reporting intelligence, which can be done through third-party reporting. There's a National Act awareness campaign, so again, you can go on the website and find that. So again, as ever in policing, we're reliant on the public to provide us with information, and we continue to request that.
Has there been a change in that regard, be it because of national campaigns or just local work being seen? Have we seen intelligence increase in any particular way?
I think the information, when you get an attack, or the attacks that we got last year, 5 attacks in 1 year, information and intelligence does go up. considerably. So we've had more information and intelligence that we're dealing with since then.
Part of the issue is in awareness. So North Yorkshire is such a beautiful county and a lovely place to live that we often have conversations not just about terrorism and radicalisation, but about drug abuse and other things that people think this couldn't possibly happen in North Yorkshire. And I think those terrorist attacks raised people's awareness, and even the North Allerton press coverage and Salisbury.
Yeah.
So I think the more the public recognise that actually in some of these communities where they think nothing like this could happen, actually some of the things that they see and hear are relevant to us is really helpful to people coming forward with that information.
And we do think that our biggest weakness in policing will be complacency. So that's why we exercise as much as we do, and we hold several exercises a year, both as a policing organisation and also with partners, to just practice and look at our preparedness for attack, make sure our skills are completely up to date, compare ourselves and benchmark, and that motivation's there to keep going. Thankfully, we don't put those skills into practice very often, but we make sure that we're completely tested and ready, because with the threat level the way it is, then an attack somewhere within the UK is inevitable.
And I thought just on the back, I think our responsibility as a force to the national strategic response is important. That's why the exercise happens, and things like CBRN training. The ACC here, which is being modest, is the chief officer lead for CBRN in terms of pursue and protect around in prevent. So as a small force, we also contribute to the national picture and the regional picture, and I think we get a lot of respect for that because we're very professional and good at it. So the risks in North Yorkshire, well, the risks for North Yorkshire are set at a national level, while the risks for the whole country are set at a national level. So the national picture, Syrian travellers and returnees, we don't have too much of an issue with that. The rise of the right wing, yes, we do. Cyber-enabled crime, yes, I think that's a national picture, and which we do. Ours is more around crime than counter-terrorism, online and Northern Ireland-related terrorism, and again, so we work in all those areas there and reflect it. But
I mean, the Matthew Folder case is a really good example of the cyber-enabled crime, because we did have victims here, didn't we, in North Yorkshire with regard to that, and he obviously that was a National Crime Agency job, which was really quite shocking. Yeah.
But again, with our cybercrime unit, it's not just crime. Again, that's the prevent element of comes under that. And our cybercrime unit, we are going to be part of a regional response. And again, I got feedback from the regional superintendent who came and said, "You're ahead of a lot of the other forces." So we're again punching above our weight.
I don't know how much you can say, Mark. You mentioned a few times the bulk of the risk in North Yorkshire is on the right wing end of things.
Yeah.
Can you tell us any more about that? What sort of thing, how those things kind of manifest, or what's changed, what the public can look out for?
Yeah, I think, well, you can, there's the EDL and groups like that, and I think the public would be able to spot the signs of sort of right-wing Nazism or fascism coming through, and it's about reporting anything that you see. There are odd pubs or places like that people gather across North Yorkshire. They come from all around the country. If people see that, pass us the information. If people see people giving leaflets out, particularly there's an individual in Selby area who gives out leaflets, sets up a stall on the streets, ring it in and tell us, yes, we know about the individual, but tell us what he's doing, because he might change his approach. Who else is he linking in with, and things like that. But it is growing. So, yeah.
Just another question. So how linked up are we with other police forces similar to ourselves to sort of understand that sort of threat, that right-wing threat? So I'm just thinking about if we're, for example, thinking about our submission around the comprehensive spending review, do we share our assessment of those types of threats with other forces similar to ourselves? And have we got a good,
That's coordinated through the north east.
But that is that regional? You see what I mean? So
there's an established network, so it has to be intelligence led. So not only do I chair the contest board here, I sit on the regional board. The rep from the regional board sits on the national board.
No, I get all of that.
Yeah.
My question is slightly different.
Yeah.
Which is not is not geographical, regional. So West Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Humberside. It's similar forces to ourselves.
We don't network in another way.
Yeah. Okay. So that's quite.
I don't think it's a gap. And the reason I don't think it's a gap is the tried and tested approaches of, for instance, how we are going to prevent individuals or assess things going on in our community.
I'm asking the question for a different reason, Amanda.
Yeah.
So which is around so if we as a group of more rural forces were sharing a common threat around right-wing extremism, that's something that we could feed into the assessment around the comprehensive spending review. So it's for a different reason, it's not for an operational...
We could easily feed that in if we needed to.
So I just think that that's something that might be quite a useful thing to do. And if we don't normally look at things in that way because we're looking at it for different reasons, then actually there might be an opportunity there to read across to other forces to
absolutely
think that.
And we do have access to that information, so we get colour-coded report, for want of a better word, of the national picture of everything that's going on. So it'll be fairly easy for us to pick up the common threads in all forces of an activity.
We've got oversight of all of it.
That comes through every month.
So
it's
just looking at things from a different perspective for different reasons.
So that information is available.
So I thought you were thinking about how do we prevent in a similar way, but from a funding perspective, it's very easy to access.
Do we, or do the CTU still compile counter-terrorism local profiles?
Yes.
And are they still made available to the office?
Yes.
A briefing once a year.
Yes. Officers come and visit us. Yes.
Top secret.
Yeah.
Okay. And then we go to the national threat level, which is just information. The threat level is on the bottom, from low up to through moderate, substantial, severe and critical. We're currently on severe, and we've been at severe for quite a substantial period of time. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it must be 3-4 years, where an attack is highly likely. Last year we went to critical twice, and my understanding, if I remember rightly, we've been to critical on 3 occasions in the UK, 2005 and twice in 2017. Critical has significant impact on the force, on all forces, and our ability to respond. So we remain as a national threat level at critical for us a short period of time, and that's usually after an attack. So currently we're sat in severe.
So after the Manchester bombings, it was critical for a while, wasn't it?
Yes.
So we have things agreed and plans in place for what critical will look like for here in North Yorkshire Police, obviously depending on what the exact threat is, but we move immediately to that through the gold structure and start to put things in place.
And it's set by JTAC. Yes, I finished. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. And these are the challenges and opportunities of Prevent, and this is, I asked my team the officers who work in the Prevent and what they see. Language and terminology, understanding what Prevent is, and more importantly, what is it isn't, both for professionals and communities, and I think you alluded to the question earlier, embedding it within all partnership agencies, and that different areas have different agencies engage with it at sort of different levels. What I'll say from the policing perspective is we feel that we're engaged at all levels because we have to be. Public perception of it, which I think links back to the first one, the whole idea that it's about spying when it's about keeping people safe. The opportunities, well, it's an opportunity to build resilience and trust in communities, to bring communities together, for communities to be part of the process. And the reason why I say that, especially when, safe and neighbourhood policing, I've been in safe and neighbourhood policing for years, the main element of prevent is about engagement. You have to get into the communities, engage, and you have to be visible, which is a great opportunity for us to utilise our safe and neighbourhood routes to do that.
In that sense, Mark, we've sort of covered it, but how much of this work is done business as usual by those neighbourhood teams, and how much is specific work done by specific?
I would say that the vast majority is business as usual. PCSOs, local beat managers linking in, the representatives that sit and feed back to the force, to me, are local area inspectors, and they sort of drive it. And the local area inspector for Catterick's doing fantastic. He is the link for that area, same in York. So, yeah, it's local policing, and that's why it's a good opportunity. Encourages community engagement.
Sorry, Bob, I just want
Yes.
to just hammer that point home a little bit, because I think there's been a bit of a debate around all of this, hasn't there? And,
Yeah.
and quite rightly with a threat level that we face at the moment, it's how does policing nationally respond to this threat level, and a sort of a pressure to sort of put more into specialist resources, when actually the bedrock of this is community policing,
Yes.
and how important community policing is to dealing with to preventing terrorism and
Yes.
those types of attacks. So I think it's really important that the public understands that this isn't some sort of specialist division of the police service. This is everyday business in our communities.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And encourages community engagement in the best traditions of British policing. So I think that just reinforces the first part of the opportunities.
Yeah.
So on that front, this is a challenge for policing generally in keeping people safe, not just a contest type problem. Often, if you hold a meeting, the people who are interested in positive about it will come, and those that don't come are the ones that we might need to be paying more attention to. How do you try and sort of get beyond those easy wins of public meeting, come and talk to us about prevent, but then go beyond that to sort of try and...
Well, I think going back to your earlier question, is it part of everyday business? And I think part of everyday business for a police and community support officer or a beat manager is to go and identify people within the community that you link in with. And I think that's where you identify the hard to reach groups, or those who are cynical. You have to get out there, you'll engage with a local school, you might engage with a local GP to find out, who is out there who's vulnerable.
And have we suffered from a lack of diversity in that respect, that we might not have had some of the officers would have liked to go and engage with communities that they might feel more comfortable with?
I was a former chair of the BPA, so you're asking me. No, I haven't seen any evidence of that. I think a lot of our police and crime, PCSOs are capable of engaging, and it's about the ability of that person's, who can communicate. There's some really good practice I've seen in Scarborough. I've seen some good practice in Skipton, and that is white PCSOs and beat managers linking in with mosques and things like that. So that would be my gut feeling.
I mean, I certainly think, talking to, going around doing those visits, one of the things that was really, particularly in York actually, was the diversity of people within the sort of I don't know what the correct terminology is, but the congregation of the mosques, if you like. There was a huge diversity amongst that, lots of different languages, and nuances there that I think, so it's very difficult to get all of that reflected in a single person who would then be tasked to go in and engage with that, because it is diversity itself.
Yeah, and I think the way that we try and encourage our engagement with our safe and neighbourhood teams is for them to go and find out. If you're going to the local mosque and you've never been before, go and find out what you need to do. And I think there's this openness. And that's how we try and encourage our staff to engage.
And certainly we found it quite, people are very willing to come and have a chat, come and talk, share a samosa,
absolutely.
Which is very true. The reason I asked my question was we also had some people saying this was a hate crime rather than a counter-terrorism thing, that they felt uncomfortable reporting to quote-unquote white officers. I think they're English officers, I think is what they said.
Yes.
Because they just didn't felt they'd be understood, and having to explain why it didn't feel nice to be a victim of that would sort of not fall on deaf ears, but not just be understood in the same way that it had potentially been a Muslim officer or something else that could potentially...
I would agree with hate crime, but I don't think it's just around race. I think with hate crime, disability, hate crime, LGBT, I think there is that barrier. But you, with a crime, you are talking about something that's happened to you. It's very, very personal and intimate that you might not want to share. With prevent community engagement, you're just having a samosa with someone, and it's a different type of approach. But with hate crime, yes, the diversity of our officers might make a difference. I think what needs to change with regard to prevent, the work needs to continue, and this is a developing piece of work, so it continually changes, the challenges continue to change, so it needs to be pushed.
So Mark, just on that, so I'm just sort of thinking over the years that I've sort of watched this. Obviously, we started off back in whenever it was with Kirsten England chairing the Gold Group in York, and at the time I think Kirsten was really trying to encourage the sort of the boroughs and the districts in particular to take this seriously. I sense that has moved on, particularly because Paul Shevlin is of course the chief executive of one of the districts. So it's good to see him chairing that sort of area of business. Do you feel that our partners, and also we've had a change of responsibility legally, haven't we, since then as well, I think, or certainly funding going to local authorities as well, direct funding going to them. They got extra money, I think, didn't they?
Yeah.
So do you feel as if we're sort of...
Yes.
I mean, more can always be done, of course.
And how it happens, I don't know. But since last year, I think other agencies, those who are responsible, even private, companies who are responsible for public spaces, have suddenly decided we need to start doing something about this.
That's good.
And you can see the momentum building up. Because people are feeling that they're responsible. If they're holding an event or they're responsible for a public space. So I feel that, yes, it is beginning to move forward.
And of course, I mean, we did have victims in North Yorkshire of the terrible bombing as well. So that brings it home as well, doesn't it?
And then, as you said earlier, you get an attack, as in Salisbury. It can happen anywhere. We need to listen to our communities and better. I think that is a key in terms of neighbourhood policing per se, and keep responding.
So how's that going to improve? What are there any specific plans, or is it just keeping pushing the message? Or
I think we look at, as you know, looking at our IAGs and the people within our communities who feed back to us. I think that needs a refresh. I think we need a wider representation, and our IAGs have been brilliant. They've done a fantastic job, but I think now it's time to sort of open it up more. So that sort of thing will assist us.
Goes back to your point about the diversity within mosques or Christianity or anything. There is no one person that can speak for a community.
Absolutely. So community panels and things like that will help with that.
But I think it links more widely into some of the work on neighbourhood policing, and it will come out of the neighbourhood policing survey. And I know Phil's doing some work with the Partnership Hub on the development of neighbourhood policing more widely, and how do we better connect and become present in our communities to the point where you build relationships, and then over a cup of tea they tell you something that you wouldn't normally discuss, but could lead to somebody saying this person's acting strangely and they're not acting normally, which could lead. And
I think that is important around the continuity of those relationships is really important, and I think we've seen a lot of change. And one of my concerns is the consequences of that change, is whether or not those relationships are as embedded as they could be. And I think it'll be interesting to see what comes out of the neighbourhood policing survey around all of that, because there were questions in there. And sometimes you see fantastic examples of, when somebody, quite naturally moves on into a different role, that handover is really good. Other times it's not as good as it could be, and it's getting all of those sort of little things in place that I think are important.
And then improvement in intelligence and information sharing both locally and nationally, and that came out of the recent review in terms of how much information and intelligence is passed because of the nature of the attacks last year in London. And I know that for the sort of intelligence community, they've sort of got a mantra of dare to share. But even then, it's still very, very difficult because a lot of this is very sensitive information. So it's the idea of trying to be more open with what you can.
Do you see that improving in North Yorkshire? Things are always difficult. GDPR no doubt makes this even more difficult now than it was last year. But
yeah, I think we're getting better at it, but there's still, you know, I have nervousness about things that I don't feel that I would want to share that because I think it's the public interest for me to keep it to myself. So I think it's easier said than done, but we'll hopefully find ways of becoming more open.
But I also think the links to safeguarding with the multi-agency hubs at the council and the city, this is very closely linked to safeguarding and people's behaviour and the fact they've been exploited by somebody either online or they're being radicalised. Often comes out not as I'm going to share this intelligence with you, the multi-agency approach to discussing somebody that appears to be vulnerable, and it might be this is the background to it. So the information does get quite rightly shared in that environment.
That's what I was sort of getting at. It sort of happens. It might happen in one part of policing better because it's seen differently, and it's whether that you can share this.
We can transfer it. So and then we go on to we need to make sure we're ready for the political changes to come. I think
so what do you mean by that?
I think my colleague is making a reference to Brexit coming along and the change to come.
That's what I was going to ask about.
I wouldn't want to be political about that, but what I'm saying about it is that when the Brexit vote came in nationally, there was a spike in hate crime. We weren't too bad in North Yorkshire at all.
We did have some.
And I think that it's a reference to the political changes that are coming.
There's another issue, isn't there, around the amount of joint legislation we hold and the powers that we share and the standards that we share.
There's a whole piece of national work going on around the impact of Brexit, and I'm told that Caroline Blackburn is our link in to do with the Brexit legislation.
Well, we also now have a PCC nationally that's got a Brexit portfolio as well. So, and obviously Brexit could come in many different forms.
Yes.
So.
And then just where you can find the information for members of the public, working together to prevent terrorism, stop terrorist and extreme online presence. There's the ACT campaign, Govern One and Run, Hide and Tell. As I said, those are all available on our North Yorkshire Police website, and there's stuff there where you can report stuff, and also, as I said, for event organisers if they want to find out what they can do to keep their events safe.
Can I, on that front, it just struck me after we had that initial conversation about big events, that probably the biggest one in North Yorkshire history, the World Championship Cycling next year.
Yes.
Is probably a whole different kettle of fish again compared to the Tour de France and the Tour de Yorkshire.
Yes.
So again, reassuring for the public that the necessary planning is being done to support those events.
Yes.
Yes.
As we speak, the planning has commenced. Well, it's started a long while back.
Yeah, Phil Kane is the gold commander for that. I think he's the gold commander across the region, actually. And he's linked in with the regional colleagues around the planning, because I think it's a 9 or 10 day event.
Yeah, it is.
So it is much bigger than what we've seen in the past.
Unlike, I think, previous Tour de France and Tour de Yorkshire races, where it's Yorkshire-wide, every day is basically just North Yorkshire and Harrogate in particular. Finishes every day.
Yeah, huge challenges when you look at the crowds and where the crowds are, how close they are to the event. And of course we'll have Project Servitor up and running for many months beforehand, just looking at how we can prevent things in a different way, and working all the way across with the event coordinators and planners, and so it's definitely not just a policing approach, but speaking on behalf of Phil, real huge policing challenge for us next year.
And not to say it was terrorism, it wasn't, but the Tour de France was stopped today because there was a protest by French farmers. So it can happen very easily.
Yeah, there's definitely been some incidents, having been an avid follower of the Tour de France these last 2 weeks, so there's quite a lot of things to learn from just in the next 2 weeks alone.
That goes right back to the beginning question I think you put to Mark, which actually on that point, depending what their intention was in disrupting that parade
Yes.
today, would determine whether it was
Arguably, was
treated as terrorism. If it's to persuade a government to change its policy, it fits the definition of terrorism.
It depends if it's a peaceful protest and all of that legislation as well.
Yeah,
doesn't
but
it?
throwing the tear gas at the
Yeah,
cyclists.
I haven't seen the coverage.
Yeah, they've
yet,
thrown
so-
it at the cyclists. They've stopped the race.
Yeah.
I think they think it was police tear gas to stop the protest that got in the
Oh,
eyes.
well, there's a lesson.
I'm sure it'll come out in the debrief.
Okay, all right. Okay,
Okay,
all right.
yeah.
Has anybody else got any comments or questions? No. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Performance outcomes and updates on 101, etc.
So, Commissioner, this is the usual performance pack, although when I say it's usual, we do keep tweaking it each month. I think all for the better, to be honest. It's becoming ever more sophisticated and starting to meet our needs a little bit more, but feedback is always welcome. I'm going to canter through this by way of exception, if I may, with some interesting comments I'm going to make about the warmer weather, I think. I've already touched upon some of the events that we've had over the last couple of weeks. The week before last was probably one of the busiest that we've had here in North Yorkshire for some time. So to set some context, we had really warm weather that makes a difference for us, and it has that difference is being felt nationally and not just here in North Yorkshire. On top of that, during that week, we policed Seymour Horse Fair, we policed the Great Yorkshire Show really successfully. We had the football match between York and Bradford. We had a really big race event on that Saturday. We had the President Trump visit to the UK alongside some protest activity that here in North Yorkshire we supplied officers to, and we also had some local protests. There was one protest in York and there was a smaller protest in Harrogate, and then we had the World Cup. So there was an awful lot of events taking place that we were doing alongside our day job of making sure we keep the public safe. We'd had lots of planning around that, and I think we managed those things really successfully, but no doubt the whole thing taken together has been a really busy period for us, and that will show here.
Yeah, and I do think that York in particular felt some of the impact of that as well. And there was that road traffic collision in the city centre, which which took resources up as well. And then we had the rave over in Settle, which was previous weekend, I think, to that, wasn't it, as well, which caused issues as well. So there has been. It may be perfect weather, but it has been a bit of a perfect storm.
Really, really challenging events over the last couple of weeks, yes. Yeah. So if we start then...
Sorry, Amanda, can I just say, because I do recognise, obviously, officers had leave cancelled and all of that sort of stuff, so to say thank you to people for working so hard, because I know it has been really quite busy, so yeah.
I'm sure that will be well received, because they certainly have felt
it. Yeah, they have, I know. Thank you.
I'll come on to 101, but I think I'm right in saying one of the days was as busy in the control room as a New Year's Eve is normally.
Yeah.
Which just for the public is an easy demonstration of how busy it was.
What we are doing is a piece of work to try and understand exactly what that impact is and what's behind it over the last few weeks. So I'm going to touch upon some of what we know during this, but actually in August thematic we're going to really concentrate on what's happened in June and July, and they're doing a piece of work ready now so that in August we can get into that in a little bit more detail than what I'm going to today, because as you can appreciate, it's been unprecedented demand and we're still trying to understand it all, albeit we've got daily and weekly responses in place to be able to manage. So I'm pleased to say that the first slide is called proactivity, and to reassure the public that proactivity does continue despite us being extremely busy. So you can see from those slides that we're trying to depict there from what we call our Proactive Police and Specialist Operations Department. From that department in particular, you can see that despite the challenges that we've had, we have continued to be active in the areas of organised criminality, particularly around drug production and supply. And I know that we talked last month about county lines, so we have continued to be proactive around that. continue to keep people safe in our roads, and then that border vulnerability about that cross-border criminality surrounded by those other forces and other areas of criminality that travel into North Yorkshire to commit crime. We've been really proactive still in relation to all of that.
So is that specifically then that border vulnerability, Samantha, is that specifically when there's intelligence that someone's coming over the border into North Yorkshire rather than something happening near the border that might be...
So it's proactive, so some of it will be intelligence-led about somebody is coming in. The others might be a response to an ANPR activation, because of course we've had that big investment in ANPR. And the others are making sure that we're patrolling in the right areas at the right time so we can start and predict things rather than have specific intelligence. So at various times of the day and night now we are out on our roads.
Does the Rural Task Force come into this pot?
Yes, they do. They are obviously they're a smaller team, so you'd expect their hours to be to be less, and they obviously have that big engagement portfolio as well, and they've been particularly active around things like the Great Yorkshire Show and other events over the last month. But yes, absolutely, they are probably pound for pound one of the most proactive units that we have.
And just to say, given what we just talked about, I know it's small, but there is a little few hours spent on counter-terrorism, domestic extremism. So again, just for the public to share with.
Yeah.
Please do respond to it and proactively.
Yes, and that isn't the summation of how much time here in North Yorkshire we spend on that. That's about a particular department. Yeah.
So just one of the things that's interesting there is the organised acquisitive crime.
Yes.
And the dogs and the Rural Task Force. What does that relate to, Amanda? Do you know?
So that will be. I can't give you specific examples of the incidents, but that will be when those units are being deployed per hours in relation to particularly rural crime, so maybe quad theft.
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah,
if that's
quad
what that is.
theft from outbuildings,
Yeah.
theft and burglary from outbuildings, etc. So that's the focus on that.
And in it being proactive, is that based on intelligence and preventing that crime, or is that responding
Both.
to ANPR?
Both.
Right.
Yeah, so it's about, so the response is somebody rings up and says I've been broken into,
Mm-hmm.
that's a response. What we're doing here is on the front foot and trying to stop crime before it happens. So that might be because somebody's come into our area and we're stopping them before they commit a crime. It might be that we're doing general patrol because we happen to know from predictive analysis that that's where a crime's likely to occur.
Because I suppose it's just because we've got the summit tomorrow.
Yes.
The rural summit tomorrow, and obviously the organised acquisitive crime there is down to the Rural Task Force and dogs. So it's just trying to sort of understand that. I know that there've been some good arrests around all of that, so it'd be just interesting to sort of know the detail behind some of that as well. Because it might be just some good examples.
Okay.
Yeah.
There was an incident only a couple of days ago, wasn't there, with a couple of quad bikes that were stolen?
Yeah, there was one in Lothersdale, I think.
And other units were involved in recovering them, and some of those involved,
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Okay. That takes me on to our calls, and you can see from May and June that increase in call volume, particularly around 999s. And then you can see that despite there has been an increase, obviously we've made those investments now within the FCR and we have a plan in place. So actually call performance is better than it was this time last year because of the investments that we've made. But clearly both locally and nationally it continues to be a challenge around the demands.
And just to point out that Lisa and I opened the new facilities yesterday. Which was good to see. I have to say, I mean, I know it continues to be a challenge, but there isn't any more money to throw at this. So North Yorkshire Police are going to have to do what you can with what with the money, because substantial investment has been made.
Well, last night was another particularly busy night.
Yeah.
It was 34 999 calls in 15 minutes. There was someone on a footbridge.
Yes. On the A1. To be fair, it's interesting, we actually had a conversation in the control room yesterday when I was in there yesterday afternoon still, and sitting in the room you can hear, because there's a beep board now for the public that might not know this, that indicates when a 39's call is waiting, and you can always tell when there's been an incident where there were just an unprecedented number of 39's coming in all at the same time, and you can't answer all those calls within the 10 seconds we'd like to answer them. And once you start to get a theme of, actually all of those people were ringing about the exact same incident on the A1 that we already knew about, but because of how the process works, you can't tell people that before they get put through. So the BT operator answers the call, they want to speak to the police, we put them through. Regardless of the fact we already know about the incident and we're on our way, individuals travelling down the A1 in hundreds of numbers will continue to call us. And that takes up then obviously the time for an operator to answer that call and explain that we're already aware of the incident. So there will be, and this is why there is the leeway on the going over the service standards, because there will always be occasions when 50 people ring us at once on the motorway and we can't possibly answer those calls, which is why there's the leeway of the service standards and the gap of answering those calls within 2 minutes for exactly those situations.
And has a knock-on impact on 101, of course.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I was in the FCR yesterday and the waiting time varied between about sort of 40 seconds and 2 minutes,
Yeah.
I would say. And you could just see it going up and down as you just watch it.
For 101.
Yeah, for 101, yeah. And it's interesting because I was just thinking how much must that feel if you're a call handler,
Yes.
when you've got that in front of you the
Yes.
whole time. I mean, you must get used to it to a certain extent, but it must put pressure on you, I think. And it's worth saying that the call handlers do a fantastic job, under a lot of pressure.
It's quite psychologically, it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, sat in there myself, I feel anxious.
Yes, exactly.
Watching it.
Yes,
And
you do.
they're
don't you?
trying to do their
Yeah.
job. And you think I'm anxious. I'm not
Yeah.
even answering the phones.
Yeah,
So they do.
exactly.
They do really desperately want to answer every
Yeah.
single call.
Yeah.
And I was just saying, we talked about this yesterday. In June, and I think this is as a result of the investment, and thank you, the nines in June, there were 7,601 calls, and we answered them on average within 8.3 seconds. It's 101 now that we really need to continue, as you've said, to answer those calls, because the buzz research that was done a little while ago, and I think this is true of a lot of call centre data, people generally now are willing to wait for a minute, 60 seconds, and after that we're then having the knock-on of they put the phone down and ring 999, and we don't want them to do that, but if we're not effective at answering 101.
And I do also think that perhaps also because there have been problems over time, people have got less patience with it now. So they are, gosh, I'm going to have to wait 10 minutes, I'm going to put the phone down. And so it becomes a bit of a vicious circle as well, and I think that's something that we need to be aware of.
I think Q-Buster and our callback facilities really helped, and the operator functions really help with people who just want a basic piece of information. But Mark Proctor mentioned to us yesterday that there are still people, regardless of the communications we put out, ringing us to ask us, for example, what time Sainsbury's closes opposite the police station, for example. And
I think there's a point to make here, isn't there? Because I'm conscious that members of our own teams watch this public accountability forum back, and there's three things we need from them. One is to answer the phone quickly. The other is to be courteous when they answer the phone, and the important thing is that they then manage risk, and they're doing all of those three things really well in really difficult circumstances. So the priority for them is not just about answering the phone as quickly as they can. They've got a whole process to go through when they answer that telephone to a member of the public who's often in dire need of our services. We're really good now at answering those 999 calls really fast, and so dealing with people that are at the higher end of risk. Thankfully, people don't have to wait for usually up to 10 minutes at a time. And thankfully, when we get an influx of 999 calls, it's lots of people phoning about the same thing that we're already dealing with, so we're keeping people safe and we're doing that job well. But it's those three things that we need from our staff, all really important.
But we've all of the research that we've had demonstrates that the public are very satisfied by what they get when their call is answered, and the people do a really good job.
Yes.
So there's the issue is more of an organisational one as to actually how we can get the numbers of calls into the control room in a satisfactory way. It's not on the way that the staff themselves respond to those in those calls. I think it's important that we distinguish between the two.
And it's actually a national picture. We had a long discussion about it last week at a national level about every single force in the country is seeing that increase in demand. And you might say that's great because the public actually have trust and confidence to ring us, but if we can't answer that increase in demand, it then impacts on public confidence.
And it's seasonal. So what this particular slide on 101 is telling us is that we've had volumes increasing over the last 2 months. But when we compare this to the same time last year, and this is why I'm saying we need to do more work and come back in August, we've actually had decreased call volumes by about 23%. So that's quite interesting, that although it's busier in May and June than it clearly was over the winter months, actually it isn't as busy this June as it was last year from a call volume from a 101 perspective. So there's more learning that we need to do around that, and we are doing work nationally with other forces and also locally to try and understand that picture over the June and July period in order to come back to you in August with some more detail around that. So we just need to understand that a little bit more. Okay, that takes me on to our calls for service, and we're building this picture up over time. It's telling us the same, I think, as it was last month, in that we've got a blend of reasons why people ring us and then we then dispatch officers. So we have crime-related jobs account for half the number of public safety and welfare jobs, but actually it accounts for 33% of all the time spent. So I'm not surprised at that, because crime-related jobs are often really complex and need a little bit more work. So it's just us understanding actually how long does it take us to deal effectively with each of the crime or public safety and welfare calls that we get into the control room, and how many resources do we then need to line up in order to deal with that. The graph depicts that the majority of response for calls for service quite clearly comes from response officers, which is what we're geared up for, but it really is a holistic approach. So it is never just about how many response officers we've got on at a given time in a given area. Our roads policing team regularly respond to calls for service. Our PCSOs support us in the most appropriate of cases. Also our neighbourhood policing teams.
On that note, sorry to interrupt. On the PCSOs, is that about what you'd expect for being dispatched to a job, or is it more or less?
It depends on the area. So sometimes in the more rural areas we might expect that the PCSO is the most appropriate resource available at that time for that particular call in service, and it goes up and down over time. So it's something that we're still trying to really understand. If that makes sense.
So just that you're going to play devil's advocate a little bit there then, Amanda. Are you saying that PCSOs are responding to calls that police officers would normally respond to?
No,
because that's what that sort of sounded like.
No, I don't think I am. I think that the calls for service in the main are dealt with by our response staff, but there may be a call that comes in that really is a local neighbourhood issue that is then suitable for a PCSO to attend in the first instance. Perhaps it's something around reassurance given. So I think that's what I'm trying to depict, that the most appropriate resource is actually dispatched to that job, and the most appropriate local resource. So on occasions our firearms teams might be the closest unit as a police officer within a rural area because of the vast area that we cover in North Yorkshire, and if appropriate we would dispatch that officer. So that depicted York. This is Scarborough and Rydale with a similar picture, I think, slightly more PCSOs this month, and again we're trying to build that up over time, depending on the type of call seen. And there we have the County Command, which of course is Hamilton, Richmondshire, Harrogate and Craven, with a very similar picture, and again we're building that up over time. Okay, that takes me on to mental health, and what we focus on here is the Section 136 power that is used to bring people into custody. There are, I think, just to put my glasses back on, there were 5 people brought into police custody over the month of June. That's higher than we've seen for some time. I've personally gone through those, and every single one of them is appropriate. So there's a small number of them have been people who've been brought into custody for criminal offences, and then once they've got into custody, they've displayed behaviour that's caused us concern. We've had them assessed, and we've then looked at a detention under 136 and removed them to a place of safety afterwards.
And has that assessment in custody process improved recently?
So it's about calling the.
Yeah, which I think.
We've obviously got the new. We've obviously got the new contract, and we obviously have that around the clock in the custody facilities that we're now using. It's probably a little bit too early to tell whether it's improved or not. But what we just had in June was a unique set of circumstances, and having looked at them all, I'm really comfortable with them all. I do have all of the details that I can discuss later with you if you needed me to, but there isn't any there that are causing me any concern at all.
So I had a sort of, this sort of falls out of really the discussions around the Crisis Care Concordat, because obviously Alicia and I go to that. I suppose there's a sort of concern, certainly from health partners, around the role of alcohol in some of these cases, and how we develop a better response in the area to that. So I think that's something that certainly the piece of analytical work that will be done through the Concordat will be looking at. So that is something that I think is important. And then the other thing that sort of stands out here, and they seem to contradict each other, is that on the street triage data, you've got an increase in Scarborough from 42 in January to 100 in June, but the opposite trend in York and Selby. And I'm wondering whether that is a street triage resourcing issue as opposed to calls for service.
So I've asked questions on that for the last 5 or 6 meetings, and it has been resourcing that's been the issue, and there have been a couple of reasons for that.
I think they've had difficulty with staff, haven't they?
So some of it was planned,
staff.
I think, and some less planned. But Scarborough, I think, fell off almost entirely and is now picking back up to where it was this time last year.
I think when we've looked at it, it's not because we've seen a reduction in the number of calls for service of that nature. It's been our response has been restricted as a result of availability of resource.
York seems slightly.
I think they have a difficulty recruiting staff, haven't they? I think because obviously we're in a sort of interim world in terms of hospitals and all of the rest of it at the moment. So I think it's a reflection of that. But I think probably it's something that we need to pick up through the Concordat.
Okay. The next slide again is just looking at the occurrence types that we're depicting, a little bit more detail again around the breakdown in the areas, officer deployments, and what we're trying to do here is just try and understand actually how many officer deployments and how many hours does it take us to deal with 136. And I think what I wanted to stress when I went through this myself is this is just about one element of mental health. So this isn't depicting the whole officer time dealing with mental health within North Yorkshire. It's just about those detained under 136. And that alone is quite a significant number of hours and number of officers. The other thing that we continue to look at is the mode of transport. Ambulance, quite rightly, is the most appropriate resource for somebody who's in crises and is ill. On occasions that can't be achieved, and we continue to monitor that.
Well, it's not on occasions; it's half, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
So, but again, there's through the Concordat, there's a task and finish group that's looking at that specifically, and we were pleased to see that Yaz came to the meeting last week. So it was good to see them, and specifically the person who has mental health within their portfolio for Yaz came to that. So that was a positive move, I think. I mean, the statistic there, Amanda, that stands out is that it's basically virtually an entire shift, isn't it, when somebody gets caught up in with a 136, so 9 hours.
Yes.
And that's the average.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. The next slide takes us to crime for June, and clearly it is just for the month of June. There's something interesting going on here that we're trying to understand. So the calls for service, the 101 calls don't seem to have increased, but actually this year compared to last year in June, our volume of crime has increased by around 20%. That's depicted very similar nationally. It is in the areas of violence and antisocial behaviour in the main, and so we're just doing a piece of work just to try and understand that a little bit more. We did predict that we would have an increase in crime. Clearly our crime recording practices are improving under the plan that we've discussed here in the past, but we do need to try and understand that trend that, like I say, is depicted nationally, and we're just doing some work around that.
So Amanda, one of the things that we were discussing earlier is so there's forces that have had their crime recording inspections who will have gone through the same process that we've gone through, because I think there's only one force in the country that hasn't been graded as inadequate in respect of crime recording at the moment. So, because we're all at different points in that journey, what you're going to see is the sort of hump, if you like, that we're all going through to increase our crime recording, and then it'll presumably, as it did last time, sort of level off once those recording practices have been embedded and the new things in place. So the question is how that balances out across all of the different forces over time.
Yes.
So we might see, for example, in the crime statistics coming up next, some forces that we wouldn't normally see that are safer than us, but actually they haven't been through that process of improving their crime recording. So we might get some odd crime statistics over the next few months as everybody sort of gets to the same level.
Yes.
Yes. Right.
So we'll reach a new norm.
We will.
But some forces haven't looked at their new norm yet because of the inspection timetable.
Yes.
And we did do a piece of work when our CDI results came in, looking at those forces that hadn't yet been inspected, and the what if.
Yes.
The findings were such that they were about to find their new norm, and actually our position remained similar to now in terms of safest place.
Yes.
But of course we can't predict what the findings of their inspection will be. But if it were the case that it was similar along the national findings of most people's inspections, that it would level out to everybody's new norm would see this increase.
Yes, exactly. Somewhere like Devon and Cornwall has obviously gone through that process already. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, this next slide is depicting antisocial behaviour, public safety and welfare, and casualties from road traffic collisions that are either killed or seriously injured. There's no exceptions of note. What we can see here is that all the commands, all the districts other than Craven, have seen significant reductions in antisocial behaviour type occurrences. Craven's rise is not significant. It's moved from 12 occurrences higher than in June 17, so we're not talking of huge numbers. Public safety and welfare continues to be the main call to service, and all areas have seen rises in some areas of public safety and welfare. Again, this fits the national picture, and the increases in these occurrence types can sometimes be attributed to the weather, and that's why I say that we're going to report back next month. Our killed and seriously injured continues to decrease, but unfortunately we have seen the rise in York and an increase in case size involving motorcycles with York as well. The next slide, the local policing slide, just shows those trends in more detail. Again, no particular exceptions to highlight. I think we've covered those off already, unless there's any questions on that.
Yes, the thing that I'd just sort of like to flag there is if you look across most areas, the area that the public are, one of the areas that the public are most concerned about is burglary.
Yes.
The arrows are mostly going upwards in respect of that. So that is one area that I would like to sort of flag as an area of concern, particularly because it's one of the things that we know the public are most concerned about, because it has a real immediate impact on them.
Yeah, as well as outcomes. So it happening is one thing, what the police do and response and how capable they are of coaching. that did it,
Yeah.
and how long it takes to do that.
So what the analyst did for me in preparation for this meeting, because I raised that question, was actually looked at the 3-month trend, because it is sometimes difficult looking at 1 month compared to another month. And actually over 3 months, the burglary increase overall is only an increase of 10, which is 1.13%. So I think that's why analytically we are saying it's not an exception at the moment. We've had the thematic on burglary where we talked about the
But
difference.
there were issues there, Amanda, that were highlighted in that thematic. So I suppose what
Yes.
I'm trying to do is continue to say that this is an area that we need to keep an eye on.
That figure wasn't so much
Yeah.
occurrences, it was how they're dealt with once they are reported.
Yes, that exactly
What
right.
priority they
Yeah,
are seen to be.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. That takes me on to the Rural Task Force slide, and I know that you particularly asked for this slide to be re-included. I'm hoping that's hitting the mark now. We talked about engagement, and of course the summer months for us with the task force is definitely not just about prevention, but is about engagement, and we've tried to depict that there. Of course, we've got the Rural Summit tomorrow, and we've got all of those problem-solving plans in place. OPOWL is one that certainly we've all talked about in the last week or so, which is aimed at reducing raptor persecution here in North Yorkshire. There's lots of others. There's Sidekick, I think that deserves a mention, which is particularly targeted response to quad plant and machinery theft from farms, and Operation Woolen, which is about delivering crime prevention advice right the way across our rural estates, whether that be small holdings or farms. And we now stand at around 6,500 visits out of the 8,500 farms that we've identified that would be suitable for that crime prevention advice. So a huge amount of work by the team in that regard. There's some other things mentioned here around productivity. In particular, we've done the training with the Moodale Association. We've trained more officers in relation to wildlife crime, and we're continuing to train our force control room staff so that they're able to give that advice at the point of first response. And that
Might just be worth mentioning on Eyeball as well. For we saw flight tipping being a particular problem in the Rural Crime Survey, and Eyeball is the start of a operation by MIP to try and understand.
Absolutely. Superintendent Paula Booth is our lead for Operation Eyeball, and whilst it isn't just a policing issue, it definitely is a partnership issue, and we are definitely playing our part at that table. We've got both the Rural Task Force, but also the strategic lead there in Paula Booth as well. And that concludes the presentation.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Anybody got any else they'd like to add? Nope. Okay, so the people element of it then, please.
Put my glasses on first, excuse me. On and off. Okay, so we do know that our HR overview, our target of 1,400 officers.
So Amanda, can I just, before we just go to that, so we had a discussion at EB about people, so it's just worth probably feeding that into this.
Yes.
So we agreed at EB that there was going to be a piece of work done around looking at officer numbers, recruitment plans, all of the rest of it. So I think if rather than go into detail today on that, we need to do a proper piece of work around it, and we'll come back to this forum with that, if that's all right.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you particularly want highlighting from here? Obviously the budget slide is there. There's just some more detail there on the total budgets for police officers, police staff, our volunteers and specials, which we're continuing to work
Got one
hard
question,
to.
Amanda, only because I feel like we haven't asked it in a while. That was something we looked at quite a lot, which really, well, probably a couple of years ago now, which was number of specials and number of volunteers, and I think we weren't quite sure what that number should be for quite some time, and how many were active, etc. I know the force had been really good, particularly when Dave was lead for citizens and policing, of pushing volunteers in particular, but what's the comfort level around the numbers of specials and volunteers and their support they're providing?
So there's just been a national piece of work under the Citizens of Policing portfolio, because they're broken down into 3 work streams of special constabulary, police support volunteers, which you've said, and obviously we have the national coordinator still working here with us, and cadets. And the special constabulary portfolio sits with an assistant chief constable in North Wales, Richard Dubisky, and he has just had his special constabulary strategy looking forward signed off at Chiefs Council last week. So there's a whole piece of work been looked at around recruitment, different types of special constabulary, because clearly there are people, that's a really good route into policing to become a special, but of course you get the churn and turnover of people joining who then want to be regular officers versus those people who want to be embedded in their communities as a long-term special. And we've had some very successful special constables that have served long periods of time and been really embedded in their communities and in teams that join for a different reason than perhaps the younger people. Also about the skills, because special constabulary years gone by was very much about uniformed officers, warranted powers, and now there's a lot of forces looking at special constabulary skills where you may not want to spend the time training people to be a uniform visible presence, but they can use their skills in a different way in the breadth of policing and the future types of crime that are coming down the track. But there's a balance with that versus a volunteer that could probably fulfil those roles without having all the warranted powers, cost of uniform, etc., if they can perform the same role as a volunteer. So there's a whole piece of work going on around that. I personally think there's scope for us to increase the number of special constables in the organisation.
They're lower than they have been, aren't they?
And
Yes.
then they will absolutely enhance the workforce mix that we have to deliver a service. And we talked about different levels of demand going up and down, and they're a really good, flexible, skilled resource that we can use. And we've talked about the number of events we have in North Yorkshire. So we're really a force that has a high number of public events. And special constabulary come into their own in that flexing of resource.
I know we also, a while back at that same time, we were thinking of particularly rural specials. I think we did a couple of recruitments for rural specials.
Embedded in communities.
Horseback type specials, I'm not sure where that got to, but yeah, okay, great.
So I think we can, on the back of the national strategy being signed off last week, we could probably explore through the partnership how we take that forward.
Yeah.
And that concludes the presentation.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm just thinking about what have we got, Will? What have we got in terms of themes coming up?
We have younger people, older people,
Victims.
victims,
Cyber.
cyber. The next 4.
Okay.
Which are young people. So next, I guess we're surrounding me. We swapped because of leave and things. We've swapped a couple round to make it easier to plan and prepare for. So
Right,
I can't
okay,
get the
so-
exact order I forgot.
Right, okay. All right, I want to come back to the people thing at some point.
Yeah.
So we need to sort of just think about that, I think. I just think it's just quite an important thing at the moment that we sort of are really clear around all of that.
As long as we've got a bit of notice, there's always
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay. All right. Have we had any questions? No. Okay. Anything else anybody would like to raise?
No.
No? Okay. That's good. So we will be here again on the 28th of August. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.